So welcome everyone to today's panel discussion. It's a fireside chat regarding whose responsibility it is to expand the quantum talent pool, looking at topics such as how can public and private partnerships aid us in achieving this ambition. And I'm delighted to be joined by a thoroughly esteemed panel today. So I was going to introduce everyone, but I appreciate we're running slightly late on time. So my name is John Barnes. I'm founder of Entangled Positions, a pure-play quantum recruitment firm, One Quantum UK and European president, and special advisor for talent and workforce to the Quantum Strategy Institute. So without further ado, bearing in mind the time, if I pass along to the panel to introduce themselves with a brief intro.
Well, do it in order. I'm Simon Freed, the VP of Business Development and Marketing at Classic. At Classic, we have a platform for accessible quantum computing programming and ultimately also execution and lots of activity in education.
I'm Elif Kizo-Cortez, and I'm the Director of Quantum and AI at Ethico. We are a think and do tank, and we focus on providing solutions for governments and companies regarding the emerging problems on ethics and legal and societal impact of quantum technologies.
Hello. Hi everyone, my name is Adam Nagus, and I am now the former Chief Data Officer for the Pearson Group. I'm a digital and data transformation expert, and I'm looking forward to this panel.
I'm Andrei Schwer from Malta. I'm a professor of quantum physics, but also I'm the ambassador for digital affairs for the government of Malta. So I'm a quantum physicist, and that's probably why I'm here.
And I'm Josie Kluwer. I'm a partner at EY, and I focus on the reskilling revolution. So we help individuals with life-changing learning, we help organizations get the talent they need, and we help governments make sure they incentivize all of the right training so their countries have the skills they need.
So for today's talk, there's a number of topics we're going to look to address. But I think it's also important that we encourage audience participation. So, please don't be shy. Do feel free to contribute, and we can bring as many ideas in as possible. But I'd like to start with kind of an overarching theme. So the quantum industry is evolving so rapidly. So I'd like to start with where our panel sees the biggest skills gap. And this could be in any number of regions. So, Elif, if I can start with you.
Sure. So I think there will be a lot of highlights from the other members of the panel regarding the technical skills. So let me start by saying I agree that firstly we need to see whether we can improve the talent pool when it comes to technical side of quantum technologies. But given my expertise, let me also say that it's important that we also look at university degrees, for example, that are focusing on more multidisciplinary approaches. We have done that for cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. We have had computer scientists working with lawyers, and I think it's quite important that also for quantum technology, we need to get prepared and looking at also social scientists learning a bit about the basics, as well as quantum technology experts to learn a bit on what are the ethical, legal, and social issues.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Having the products and applications that are fit for the users is thoroughly important. And Andrei, if I can come to you next.
So I know we were having a discussion about this earlier as well in the room over there. One could ask, do we need so many quantum engineers, or should we focus more on the application layer and things like that? In which case, perhaps the skill gaps that we'll face are probably close to the skill gaps we already face with AI and big data at the moment. So that could be an interesting argument, an interesting discussion in and of itself. However, let me kind of wear my Maltese hat. Well, one of the big issues we tend to face is not so much on the thematic kind of skill gaps. But very often we talk about here speaking about the EU, for example, the EU has these skill gaps, so let's set up courses here, 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 in these different areas, and so on. But sometimes we forget about some of the regions, and we have an issue with skill gaps throughout in certain parts of the world. So I would say perhaps we could take it at a meta level. The skill gap is actually something we need to consider across a number of different themes, but we also need to focus on the geographic distribution as well to make sure that we can all work with quantum.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important topic because it allows more people to come in the ecosystem and do the hard work that everyone's trying to perform.
Well, I think that's the key question, the ecosystem. So I've sat in the audience all day today and listened to lots of all the different speakers. And coming from a strategic workforce planning background, that question comes up a lot to do with quantum, and honestly, I don't know what the answer is because I don't know what a company really needs to bring in from an internal perspective. Is it going to be the case that the cloud providers, let's say Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they have all the infrastructure knowledge? It's going to be a case that you're going to be using their infrastructure when it comes to quantum computing? So you only need to have a high-level understanding and you can focus on, let's say, the application level or on the use cases, or do you actually need to have that physics knowledge internally inside your organization? So if you are a company that's still on-premise and you're proud of it and you're keeping everything in there, that's going to be very different to a company that's gone cloud-native and cloud-first. So it's going to be very difficult to understand where the skills gaps are if your point of view is as a corporate leader. If you're a government, then it's going to be different again because Microsoft still needs to find the talent from somewhere, or Google does. So there is definitely a skills gap, but it depends on the type of organization you are to answer that question.
Yeah.
Can I build on that? Because I think there's a really important model that we should think about, which is the S-curve. So if you think about the adoption of quantum computing, and think about it going through the S-curve. I'm going to do it your way, so that's our S-curve. So the skills gap and the investment you need in skills is going to differ depending on where you are in on that curve. So right now, we're at the bottom, right? So we're just about to take lift off. So the investment we need in skills and where the skills gap is in deep technical skills that are in the universities, and we need them in the kind of startup land. As we lift off, we need to broaden, don't we? Because, and therefore, the skills gaps is going to be much broader. So we're going to need lawyers who understand quantum. We're going to need regulators who understand quantum. We're going to need data folk who understand quantum. We're going to need business leaders who understand quantum, etc. So that's where our skills gap's going to be. And then once you hit the top of the S and start to plateau, that's when you have to go completely mass market, and you're going to have a big gap across the whole population with all the people who are going to be using your technology. So that's when you get to the point, like we are with kind of IT now, where you need people like my mum to be able to understand it and use it. And I think that it's helpful to think about the journey that this industry is just about to go on, to think about when we're thinking about that skills gap, is it a now problem, is it a next problem, is it a beyond problem, and where you are on that S-curve.
Can I just add one sentence, kind of building on top of this? Because I understand Adam's point, and I'm with you 100%. The only thing I would add, though, is let's take it from a nation's perspective, but it could be a big company where you say, we're going to concentrate on application layer, so there's Google, Microsoft, whatever, we're just going to build stuff on top of their quantum hardware. I would argue that even so, you need those key people who understand what's going on at the bottom, at the lower layers. Certainly, if you're a nation, because you need to have some sort of sovereignty. But also, any large company, okay, you can be cloud native, but what is happening in the cloud? Are they just hoodwinking me, or is there actually is what they're giving me what they say they're giving me? And I think that's not a huge skills gap for those companies, but you still need that. Just more. Yeah.
And Simon, if you can bookend us.
Yeah, I'll definitely bookend it in the sense that I think you could use AI maybe as a bit of an analogy. We're not at the point where quantum is accessible and we can have people who maybe don't know much about AI, but they could be fantastic prompt engineers. We'll probably get there eventually. So you need the long-term training. We need to see quantum in schools. We need to see it in universities. But I think also we need to, in the short to perhaps medium term, look at who else is a candidate to actually expand the ability. And I think we have lots of people in AI and other areas that are computationally advanced that are perfectly good candidates to transition or to contribute to quantum, but perhaps the tools they need are still a little bit obtuse.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we focused on was the short, medium, and long-term differentials. But one thing I noticed that from this year's conference to last year is that there's talks of skills gap rather than talent shortage, which is a much more natural fit with these matters. So I think that's a step in the right direction. And with organisations working with emergent technologies and having to find that balance between hiring for skills or training up existing team members, there's pros and cons for both, or requirements for both. But I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into what people have found works particularly well, and how we've helped to future-proof that future flow of talent. So Josie, can you start us?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first thing I want to say about the skills shortage is that the way to think about this problem is not if only we can find or train like all the people we need and then we'll be fine, right? And sometimes we go into it thinking that, like, that is never going to happen. I'm sorry to say you are never going to have all the quantum computing skills that your organization needs, not now, not later, not ever. And therefore, the way we should be thinking about this is in a world of scarcity. And if you recognize that these are scarce skills, you need to think about, okay, so what does that mean? It means you need to think about deployment better, you need to think about incentivization better, and you need to think about that talent pool as a pool. Of course, we need to do both, right? Yes, we need to hire people, but we also need to upskill and reskill people. And I want to emphasize the importance of the workplace in doing that, and employers. So somebody, I'm sure, will say it's really important that we teach more of this stuff at school, and yes, it is, but 85% of the workforce in 2030 has already left school, right? So employers have a massive role. And really what we need to be doing is aligning the incentives in the system so that people are learning more about tech, organisations are investing in their people learning more about tech and quantum, governments are investing in it, yes please, and training providers and education providers are also investing in it. And what we need to do is line those incentives up so that we are creating a groundswell for, I was going to say sufficiency, but I don't mean sufficiency, as much as we can possibly get. And a good example of this at EY, we have said we know that everybody's going to need to upskill, reskill in data and technology. And so we have said anybody, anywhere at EY, whatever you do, you can have access to a free, modular, stackable set of qualifications that you can work through and get a MBA at the end of it in technology. So that will help.
And Simon, obviously with Classic working right at the forefront of creating quantum technologies, how do you see this?
Well, certainly when I could take it from the enterprise perspective, and we do many projects with enterprises who are either at the very beginning of their quantum journey and others who are quite advanced. And when it comes to the skill gap at the very beginning, if you need a real expert, they are very, very rare. And that, I think, is something that education will have to help us with. But once you look within the organizations, we often find that the best way to deal with the skills gap is to be more inclusive. And that means having somebody perhaps who has the hard skills, somebody else who has associated skills. But I think the other bit that's often missing is, how do I implement this from a business perspective? What does this mean? So you don't have those silos of people who are perhaps skilled trying to figure out how to bring the rest of the organization with them. So you need to learn how to deploy it as well as to actually do it.
So it's a kind of integration and looking at the composite outputs rather than an individual contributor so much.
Can I give an
Adam,
example?
I saw the microphone switching.
I'm going to be controversial as usual. I agree with both of you, and I'm going to use the data science example again, because we've recently been through it. And my opinion, as somebody that's built a lot of data capabilities, is we really screwed it up. What I mean by that is the data scientists have been around for a very long time. And 30 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago, a data scientist was, a stereotypical old man with a beard. And he had 30 years experience in the industry. He obviously was very good at statistical modeling as well. And these are the people that really engineered Siri and Alexa and created that foundation that became the title, the marketing for the modern data scientists. And then we all remember the headlines, data scientist, the sexiest job in the world. And then all of a sudden, all the universities created degrees called data science. And all of a sudden, a data scientist was a 21-year-old coming out of university with zero experience. And as business leaders, we were giving them the same salaries, 100 grand on day one, as a data scientist that had been there 30 years. That didn't work. 80% of the work, sometimes 90% of the work of these new data scientists sits on the shelf. It's all theoretical. They don't know DevOps. They don't know how to productionize. They don't know what return of investment is. They're playing around because they've come straight from academia. And to the point of it has to be a group. Yes, we need these Python developers, which we call data scientists, but we need that deep industry expertise. And if you can't have everything in one person, a unicorn, then you need those pods of people to come together. And hopefully we learn of what we did with data science when we're looking at quantum and make sure we realize you can't just build a quantum expert with a degree and then just hire them. And just because they're rare at first, pay them lots and lots of money.
May I? Because there's a big lesson to be learned there. And one of the things that I've seen happening is something like this. And I would argue that perhaps it's more important to focus on making sure the foundations, starting at a very early age, STEM foundations are very strong, because then you create a workforce that's very adaptable, very, very, very strong in a number of different fields. Do you want to focus your workforce to become data scientists? By the time 5-year-olds enter the workforce in 10, 15 years, well, not 10, 15 years' time, the world will have moved on. So rather than saying, okay, we need data science, so let's put data science in all our curricula, that's a very reactionary move. Perhaps the smarter way would be make sure the foundations are much stronger. And some anecdotal kind of evidence to back this up. I'm very familiar with a startup in Malta that's doing quantum communications. I'm a physicist, so I'm happy with physicists writing computer code, but we're terrible at it. We're just really terrible at it. And what we did, what this company did was basically recruit software engineers, taught them the rudiments of the physical process going on, and then they just overhauled everything and did something about 10 times better because of the experience they have, because of the background they have. So yes, there might be a shortage of people who understand quantum communications, quantum computing. But in reality, how much of that is a necessity to know kind of the nuts and bolts? How much of that is a necessity to know how to integrate into DevOps, into this and that and the other? So sometimes we tend to be a bit too reactionary. Maybe it's good to pull back a bit.
I think actually having that basis as a nod to Chris, who coaches people on how to succeed at jobs that don't yet exist, that gives that inherent flexibility to the workforce of the future. I think alongside that, Alif, I think ensuring long-term collaboration is important. I'm wondering what policies you might envisage that could safeguard an equitable ecosystem and ensure that all have access to future prosperity, whether inside quantum or users of quantum.
Yeah, let me try to also bring together a few things that was mentioned as well. So for example, as a general thing to make sure that the talent pool is really being developed from earlier ages on, I would think that it would be a great idea to continue investing in increasing digital skills and updating this framework. EU does that, for example. So as the need arises, as the technology is changing, then you are able to have a policy in place that allows these digital competences that needs to be taught in curricula curriculums to be updated. And regarding more the policy about making sure that there's, let's say, equal access to resources, I can divide it in two maybe. At the national level, maybe we can think about the market a bit. And if we are seeing that there are a lot of multinationals that have a lot of resources that are investing in quantum, and that might really get to a point where we are seeing more winner takes most kind of situation, right? Then it might be a good idea for the national level to have policies that encourage also SMEs or subsidize the SMEs to get into that practice, because for their chances to increase in improving the skills, they would need to have at least some access to certain simulations maybe that they can't normally afford on their own. And just briefly on the international level, I think very correctly my colleagues already mentioned it a bit, it would be quite important to have policies in place to support the developing countries as well, and to make sure that we are having equal access so that we can have more talent distributed across the world as well.
Yeah, I think that opening up the pathway to as many people as possible is a good thing when you're looking to solve very hard challenges. You know, why limit yourself?
It comes with a balance, of course, that like-minded nations sometimes would like to make sure that they know who has access to certain technologies. So it's a very fine balance, but we can just say that as long as, of course, all of these security concerns are addressed, it's quite a nice way to make sure that we have more talent.
And I'd like to stick on the theme for, if we may as well. So we've seen so many developments come through, collaborations, partnerships, integration of different aspects of the ecosystem. And that's still a fundamental part of quantum, but we're also seeing organizations, states, unions looking at certain aspects to go alone with that. And as you say, it's a very fine balance to get these things right. And I appreciate it's not an either or, but I'd love to add a bit more depth into whether those that can go alone should, you know, whether there's more benefit in pooling resources, and if that is actually something that is affected as time develops, or likely to be affected as time develops. So I think with that, Simon, can we start with yourself?
Sure. I mean, I'd hazard that nobody can really go it alone in this industry today, whether it's issues that relate to the supply chain of the hardware. If you need the lasers, you're probably going to somewhere in Europe. If you're looking for the cooling, you're probably going to somewhere in Denmark or perhaps in Japan. And so I don't think that there's any way, as much as there does seem to be a growing regulatory interest in dividing and separating, I think that's something that is probably going to be very harmful to the industry. And I think the industry is doing a great job of being transnational, sourcing from whatever happens to be best. And at this point, I think this next phase of quantum will require partnerships. There's no way we can guarantee the future of quantum if we're partitioned. Yeah, and I think with regards to that, it's a necessity to find the next stage. And obviously, Andre, this is something that's very close to your heart as well. So I'd like to bring you in on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I'm kind of in two minds about this, in the sense that no one nation, no one region, I mean, even the European Union, one could argue, is not big enough to go it alone. Yeah. So in a sense, I do agree with that, but there's also the counterpoint, which is having some sort of artificial boundary. Now, how you justify that politically is not up for discussion here. But having some sort of boundary saying, okay, by 2026, quantum computing in Europe must be built within, with devices, all manufactured and owned by European Union companies. That helps to spur innovation sometimes, because yes, you could just go to this country or this other country and use their supply chain, but this way you're kind of forced into building that supply chain. And there are political reasons for doing that, but from the point of view of someone who loves seeing innovation grow, I think that could actually be a positive effect of that. Now, from the point of view of a tiny country, of course, we can't hope to kind of build a quantum computer. I mean, more than a toy. But I see value in participating in some sense in all of this. So even though it might be too small to make a dent, again, having people who understand the tech, having people, I think that's a necessity. Otherwise, we're just cutting ourselves off completely from the field. And now from the point of view of an EU country, the EU saying everything must be made within the EU, that gives us an opportunity to say, okay, let's develop part of the value chain here, even though it exists somewhere else. So it's not an easy question to answer. You can see all sides to it.
As long as we're not naive, I think that's really what
Yeah.
it needs to be. If we take another lesson from history, the space race, the US went alone almost, to get to the moon. But I think if we think about it, they probably would have got there faster if they collaborated with the Russians. And if we look at the International Space Station and the collaboration we get through that, and the James Webb Telescope and all the different countries coming together to do those types of feats that we heard about before from our NASA colleagues, that's amazing. But it doesn't mean that some people won't try and go alone. And we've all heard how this can be weaponized, this technology.
Yeah.
And just like nuclear power and nuclear weapons, there could be a dystopian future, unfortunately, where quantum becomes highly regulated. We just don't know yet.
And I think it's very difficult to envisage that. It's a known unknown, but there's also the unknown unknown that comes off of that. I'm conscious of the time ticking away, so I'd love if just to sort of close things off to hear about if there was one thing that you could implement to boost the global quantum workforce or to safeguard its future, what that would be. If we can go down the line, Simon, if we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be accessibility and education. I think those are the two things that are necessary. And I think currently the threshold for getting into quantum is a very, very sort of high one. As things expand, there'll be many more roles, and hopefully the tools will be more accessible. I think that's the key.
And Elif.
Yes, let me build on that again. So for education and accessibility, I'm also a researcher for the NSF Engineering Research Center on Quantum Networks, and they have great programs in place. One is focused on K-12 education, which is high school education, which usually we don't even think of it. But they also have a program targeted at children, and they make sure that children that are in, let's say, more undeveloped areas, who would never maybe come across quantum physics until they are later into life, they do a program where they're visiting many neighborhoods and integrate children and teach them just the basics of how quantum physics works. So I find this kind of policies great to encourage or safeguard our future for quantum workforce.
And we've seen around the world, actually, with entangled positions, how you get the trigger with people and they get bitten by the bug,
Yeah.
no matter where they're from or what language they speak. And Adam, if we can bring your thoughts in on this.
I'm very excited about quantum. However, I'm very scared because I don't know if the timing is right for the hype. So virtual reality, it's been around for decades. The tablet computer came out from Microsoft way before the iPad. It wasn't successful. And we're at the beginning, as Josie said about the S-curve for quantum. And in the current world of data, where there's so much news and social media, hype just runs so fast. We're seeing about AI and machine learning. It's always AI and machine learning, even though they're two completely different things. It's because the marketing has gone so much faster than what the actual technology can actually do, or the talent and skills out there. I feel like we're going to run the risk of talking up quantum, of what it could do, and then it's going to be 20 years before it can actually do it, and everybody will be, we heard that 20 years ago, why do we invest in it now? So I think it's a balance. We need the hype to get the investment so we can get to the technology, but we need to rein it in with some realization as well and hope the timing is right.
So keep it at excitement and not hype. And Andre, if we can hear your thoughts.
Just, the thing is flashing, so, no, I mean, building on top of this, just very briefly, as I said earlier, it is useful from this perspective to make sure that we raise generations of students who know STEM and love STEM, and then whether they end up being quantum scientists or this or that is immaterial at this stage. But let's make sure the foundations are right. I think every nation should make sure that we get the foundations right, and then industry will find the right people with maybe a bit of upskilling. Just a very brief plug, because I heard echoes of this. There is something called the Open Quantum Institute, which is very recently launched by the Geneva Science Diplomacy Anticipator, excuse me, and their idea is to make quantum computing in particular accessible to the global south, but also countries, other countries that don't currently have the resources. So there are some movements, and this is supported by Microsoft and a few other companies as well as nations. So there are some movements to make sure that quantum is accessible to the broader global population. So there's another kind of aspect of making sure we all do quantum.
And Josie, if you can close the show for us.
I'll be quick. So I would close the gender gap. Women make up 20% of the STEM workforce, 30% of undergraduates. The company or the country who can close that gap is going to have access to all the talent you need.
And just echoing that, I did some research on the work we've done this year, and over 60% of the placements we have made were female. So it's not that it can't be done. You know, so. But as the panel have mentioned, we did run ever so slightly over. But big round of applause for the panel. Some fantastic thoughts there.